In 1900, the American industrial machine was hungry. It needed a fuel source that was cheaper than coal, easier to control than union men, and small enough to fit inside the gears. It ran on children. We are taught that child labor was a mistake, a dark chapter we accidentally stumbled into before we became civilized. We are taught that everyone agreed it was wrong, and one day, we just stopped. That is a lie. When the U.S. Congress finally tried to ban child labor in year 1918, the Supreme Court didn't just say no, they declared the ban unconstitutional. They ruled that stopping a 10-year-old from working 12 hours a day in a coal mine violated his freedom. The system didn't exploit children by accident. It was designed to run on them. And if you look at the laws changing right now in 2025, it looks like the system wants them back. This is the story of how America built an economy on the backs of children, and why the people who profited from it fought like hell to keep it legal. Let's start with the question nobody asks. Why children? If you owned a factory in 1900, why would you want to hire a 10-year-old instead of a grown man? The answer is simple. Children were the perfect workers. First, they were cheap. A child earned about 50 cents a day. An adult man earned $2. If you could replace 5 men with 10 kids, you just cut your labor costs in half. Second, they were obedient. A 30-year-old miner knew his worth. He could organize a strike. He could walk off the job. A 10-year-old, he did what you told him. And if he didn't, you fired him and hired his younger brother. Third, and this is the part that haunts me, they were small. In the coal mines of Pennsylvania, adults couldn't fit into the narrow tunnels where the coal veins ran, so mine owners sent children. They called them breaker boys. These kids sat hunched over conveyor belts for 12 hours a day, picking rocks out of coal with their bare hands. The coal dust shredded their lungs. Their fingers bled, and if they fell asleep, they fell into the machinery. In the textile mills of the South, children crawled under the looms to fix broken threads while the machines were still running. Factory owners loved this. They didn't have to stop production. They just sent a kid under the gears. By 1900, over 2 million American children were working full-time jobs. That is 1 in 5 kids. And here is the thing. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even controversial. This was just how the economy worked. But then, a group of people decided to fight back. The movement to end child labor didn't start in Congress. It started with photographs. In 1908, a man named Lewis Hine walked into the factories and mines with a camera. Factory owners didn't want him there, so he lied. He told them he was taking pictures of the machinery. Then, when the bosses looked away, he photographed the children. His images were horrifying. Kids with missing fingers. Kids covered in coal dust so thick you couldn't see their skin. Kids who looked 50 years old at age 12. Hine published the photos in newspapers across the country. And for the first time, middle-class Americans who bought cheap clothes and cheap coal had to see where it came from. The public was outraged. Activist groups like the National Child Labor Committee started lobbying Congress. They had one demand: make child labor illegal. But the factory owners had a problem. Their entire business model depended on cheap labor. If they lost access to children, their costs would skyrocket. So they did what powerful industries always do when the law threatens their profits. They fought back. In 1916, Congress passed the Keating-Owen Act. It was the first federal law banning child labor. The law said that any company using child workers couldn't sell their products across state lines. It was a brilliant move. Most factories depended on interstate trade, so this law effectively killed the business case for hiring kids. The law passed. Parents celebrated. Reformers thought they had won. But then, a man named Roland Dagenhart sued the government. Dagenhart worked in a cotton mill in North Carolina. He had 2 sons, and both of them worked in the mill alongside him. When the Keating-Owen Act passed, his sons lost their jobs. Dagenhart argued that the federal government had no right to tell him whether his kids could work. He said the law violated his freedom as a parent. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in 1918, in a 5-4 decision, the court sided with Dagenhart. They struck down the child labor ban. The court ruled that regulating labor was a state issue, not a federal one. They said Congress had overstepped its authority. But here's the real reason they ruled this way. The justices believed in something called freedom of contract. This was a legal doctrine that said any restriction on who you could hire or how much you could pay them violated the Constitution. Under this logic, banning child labor wasn't protecting kids. It was restricting the rights of parents and factory owners. Let me say that again. The Supreme Court looked at a 10-year-old working in a coal mine and said, "This is freedom." Congress tried again. In year 1919, they passed a second child labor law, this time using the tax code. They slapped a 10% tax on any company that used child workers. The hope was that the tax would make child labor too expensive. The Supreme Court struck it down again. Reformers were furious. They realized the only way to beat the court was to change the Constitution itself. So they drafted the Child Labor Amendment. It would give Congress the explicit power to regulate child labor. The amendment passed Congress in 1924, but it never got ratified. Why? Because factory owners, farming lobbies, and conservative groups launched a massive propaganda campaign. They told parents that the amendment would let the government steal your children. They told small business owners it would destroy their farms. They spread fear, and it worked. The amendment died. For 20 more years, American children kept working. It wasn't until 1938 that child labor finally became illegal nationwide. And it didn't happen because America suddenly grew a conscience. It happened because the economy collapsed. The Great Depression changed everything. When a quarter of the country was unemployed, the argument that kids need to work to help their families stopped making sense. Unemployed adults were lining up for jobs. Why were kids still taking them? In 1938, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act. It set a federal minimum wage, capped the work week at 40 hours, and banned most child labor. The law said kids under 16 couldn't work in factories or mines. Kids under 18 couldn't work in hazardous jobs. This time, the Supreme Court upheld it. Why? Because by 1938, the court had changed. Roosevelt had threatened to pack the court with more justices if they kept blocking his New Deal laws. The justices got the message. They stopped striking down labor protections. So, child labor ended. Not because the system decided it was wrong, but because the economy didn't need kids anymore. But here is the thing nobody talks about. The Fair Labor Standards Act didn't ban all child labor. It carved out a massive exception for agriculture. If you work on a farm, the rules don't apply. Kids as young as 12 can legally work unlimited hours in the fields. They can operate dangerous machinery. They can be exposed to pesticides. And it is completely legal. Why? Because in 1938, Southern Democrats controlled Congress. They represented states with huge agricultural industries that depended on cheap labor. They told Roosevelt, "If you want this law to pass, you have to exempt farm work." So he did. Today, hundreds of thousands of children still work in American agriculture. They pick strawberries in California. They harvest tobacco in North Carolina. They work 12-hour days in 100-degree heat. And because they are on farms, they have almost no legal protections. The Department of Labor calls agriculture the most dangerous industry for young workers. Kids are crushed by tractors. They are poisoned by pesticides. They suffer heat stroke in the fields. But because of that 1,938 loophole, it is still legal. And now, in 2025, some states are trying to roll back the protections we do have. In the last 3 years, at least 10 states have introduced bills to weaken child labor laws. Arkansas repealed a law requiring work permits for 4-year-olds. Iowa passed a law allowing kids as young as 14 to work in meatpacking plants and industrial laundries. Wisconsin is considering a bill to let kids work past 11 p.m. on school nights. The argument is always the same. Kids want to work. This teaches them responsibility. But here's what they don't say. These bills are being pushed by industry lobbies facing a labor shortage. They need workers. And the cheapest, easiest workers to exploit are the ones who don't know their rights. So let me ask you this. Why does any of this matter? Because the history of child labor is the history of who we decide is worth protecting. For 150 years, America looked at children working in coal mines and said, "This is fine." Not because we didn't know it was brutal, but because stopping it would cost money. The Supreme Court didn't protect child labor because they believed in freedom. They protected it because they believed the economy mattered more than children. And when we finally banned it, we didn't ban it everywhere. We just banned it in the places where it was no longer profitable. Every law, we have the 40-hour work week, the minimum wage, workplace safety rules exists because someone fought for it. And every single one of those laws has loopholes because the people in power made sure of it. If you think child labor is a relic of the past, look at your clothes. Look at your phone. Look at where your food comes from. The kids aren't in American factories anymore, but they are still out there. In cobalt mines in the Congo, in garment factories in Bangladesh, in agricultural fields in California. The system didn't stop exploiting children. It just moved them somewhere you can't see. This is how the system was actually built, and this is how it still works today. Subscribe to System Explained for more hidden history of work, money, and power.